Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate, part one of our discussion. We saw an exclusive report for reporters, the France 24 investigative news magazine, 1 year after the pullout of French forces, a return to Kapisa Province. With us to talk about it right now is from Townshend, Vermont, former UN Deputy Special Representative for Afghanistan, Peter GALBRAITH. Welcome back as well to Fahimeh ROBIOLLE, who is a scholar and conflict management consultant, just back from Kabul. France 24's Leela JACINTO, who's covered the Afghan conflict for a long time. And we're pleased to also welcome, for part two of our discussion, best-selling author and journalist Ahmed RASHID, who joins us from Lahore in Pakistan. I'm going to start with you, Fahimeh ROBIOLLE. The Afghan army, as portrayed in the report we just saw, with mock prisoners, a little bit unsure on how to handle some of the equipment. Is that the Afghan army you saw when you were there 2 weeks ago?
I have been in Kabul 2 weeks ago, as well as in Herat, to participate at a symposium on dialogue about the security. It's the second year that this symposium has been organized with the international personality present in this symposium. And what I have seen in Kabul as well as in Herat is in comparison with 2009, where there was a lot of foreigner soldiers in the streets. And now there is only the Afghan people in the streets who organized as police or makers and not the army.
So you've seen this progressive handover.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
are the Afghans security forces, are they in control of the situation? Or in that report, it was quite an unflattering picture of them we saw.
For example, I can give you another example. In the streets of Kabul, we could see the very big cars with the dark windows and without the number past years. And now they are obliged to have the windows, clear windows, that we can see who are in it. If not, it stops the cars.
So you felt safer this time in Kabul than
Absolutely.
You did?
And in Herat also. And what I can add, the control in the airports are really in Herat airport. You seem to be in one of the provinces in France. The controls are exactly the same.
All right, so that's in stark contrast with what we saw in the report. Peter GALBRAITH, your thoughts on that report? Was it a sneak peek of what the rest of Afghanistan will look like once there is a significant drawdown, if not complete departure of foreign forces?
No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. But it is indicative of the problems that exist in the Pashtun areas of the country. One has to remember that Afghanistan is an ethnically very diverse place. And the Taliban have no support in the Hazara regions, virtually none in the Tajik areas. So we're really talking about the roughly half the country that is Pashtun. And there, frankly, when the Americans were there and the French and others, well, they controlled the bases they operated from. They could control the main roads. They could control whatever territory they were patrolling. But the rest of it was controlled by no one, or was a place where the Taliban could operate freely. And your report, and it was extremely good reporting, indicates that the situation is more or less the same. The Taliban control their bases. They control the road. The Afghan army control their bases. They control the road. And the rest of the area where they're not present is dominated by the Taliban.
So you can't put a soldier behind every bush, Peter GALBRAITH, but what does it say about foreign forces? Now we're hearing talk they might stay an extra decade. Your thoughts on that?
Well, what's being discussed now is a very small investment on the part of the international community as compared to the 600+ billion that has been invested by the United States alone since 2001, and the several thousand lives that have been lost. So I think it's, I'm not sure it will make any difference, but I don't see any harm in it. But I think there's one big issue that's out there that is worth mentioning. President Karzai said today that he wasn't going to sign the agreement to allow the U.S. forces to remain until next year, until after the presidential elections. These are elections where he rigged the elections in 2009 that secured him his current term, and his brother is a candidate in April. And it does raise the question as to whether he's trying to use this as a leverage to win support so that the international community will be accepting of those results if they're as unfair as they were in 2009. And frankly, there's every indication that the fraud will be equally bad.
All right, so that will, of course, discredit the central authorities in Kabul. Ahmed RASHID, the snapshot you take today of Afghanistan compared to a year ago when the French pulled out, is it as bleak as it appears at first glance?
Well, I think there's a lot of uncertainty among the public. People really don't know what will happen in the spring and summer of 2014 when the foreign troops, most of them at least, pull out. At the moment, we don't know if some American and NATO troops will remain, 8 to 10,000 of them, but they certainly are not going to be sufficient to prevent any Taliban onslaught. Now, I think also that the Taliban are going to increase their hold on the countryside. The Afghan army is not going to contest that, and they're going to be protecting the towns and cities and roads rather than the countryside. And the possibility is that the fighting will spread also into the north of Afghanistan, where the Taliban have they have bases up in the north in some areas. So the real hope will lie in who will be the new president in April after the presidential elections, and will this new president be seen as someone who has been legitimately elected and whom the Taliban will be willing to compromise with. And
on that score, Ahmed, do you see the same scenario that Peter Galbraith is dreading, that there'll be the ballot will be stuffed and it will be Karzai's brother who wins?
I don't know about Karzai's brother, but I fear very much that Karzai will choose a successor before the election, and that there will be the possibility of a lot of rigging in order to get that successor elected and chosen. At the moment, the front runner, if you look at it, in plain numbers, the front runner is actually the leading opposition figure, Dr. Abdullah, who could certainly be well ahead of any of the Karzai nominees, because there are 5 or 6 of those nominees. And what I'm sure the President Karzai is going to do, he's going to merge those 5 or 6 nominees into 1 or 2 nominees for himself, so that the vote is so that their vote increases.
So at the end of the day, Leela JACINTO, whether it is Abdullah, whether it is a Karzai-backed candidate who wins, does it make any difference for the long-term prospects of Afghanistan?
I think it does make a difference. And just, talking about the elections, I was looking at the list of candidates, same old figures, many more warlords than in 2009. And you're starting to see alliances that I would not expect, like Mr. Ashraf Ali Ghani, who is a very respected figure, having a running mate in General Dostum, a warlord with a track record like that. But indeed, I mean, and it is, Francois, I've been covering Afghanistan for more than a decade now, and I have to admit I'm guilty of this as well. It's very easy for reporters to talk about what's not working. That's an easier story to do than what is working. We do have a parliament, and, Parliament has to approve the BSA, the bilateral security arrangement. It does matter who is elected in next year. Will there be rigging? Will it be a compromise election? very likely. This is a very dangerous country to conduct an election. But we do have, we have an opposition figure in Abdullah Abdullah. He's Tajik and Pashtun. We're going to have to watch, the ethnic component once again, and definitely fears of how free and fair this election will be. But there is no alternative. Karzai's term is up. He has to leave, and there has to be a new election.
And of course, as we were mentioning, there's a lot of things right now coming to a head in Kabul. Peter Galbraith was mentioning the fact that the terms of that foreign presence, the limited foreign presence, being put right now to a Loya Jirga, that's a council of elders being convened in Kabul. There you see some of the terms of that proposed deal. It would then have to go to Parliament before being signed on to or not by the next president after next spring. So it's the beginning of a long dialogue. And it's also perhaps a look in at what the relationship is between the central authorities in Kabul and those U.S.-led troops who've been there, again, for 12 years. In a last-minute bid to bolster support, President Obama sending a letter promising the U.S. will continue to respect Afghan sovereignty, although his Secretary of State stopped well short of contrition.
Let me be clear. President Karzai didn't ask for an apology. There was no discussion of an apology. There is no, it's just not even on the table.
Peter Galbraith, is the Obama administration handling this right?
Yes, at this stage, I think they are. They are trying to have a small force there, provide some additional security, and maybe just as its presence will provide some sense of security against a Taliban.
And by the way, I know you're also a state senator there in Vermont. How's that going down with your constituents?
Well, I don't think that people are not much focused on the Afghanistan Accord. Look, as far as the United States is concerned politically, the President Obama has gotten the United States out of 2 wars, Iraq and Afghanistan. He's avoided several others, and I think that's what people appreciate. That said, they're now focused on other problems, including all the current difficulties in healthcare. But coming back to Afghanistan, and what Secretary Kerry was saying, again, I think that's about right. The United States should not be in the position of apologizing in general. It made big sacrifices on behalf of the Afghans and the Afghan government. Absolutely, some of the tactics were heavy-handed. They produced civilian casualties when they shouldn't have. And for those incidents, there was apologies and compensation. Perhaps more should have been done for those incidents, but not a more general apology for having been there and for having fought in a country, frankly, from whose territory came an attack on the United States.
We have a viewer on Twitter asking, is there any reason why the U.S. military should still be in Afghanistan? Let me put that to you, Ahmed RASHID. Is there a reason why the U.S. military should still be there, Ahmed?
Well, I hope there will be a settlement, because most Afghans do want a small contingent of U.S. military to stay, because I think it will be, in many respects, a stabilizing force and a stabilizing factor. And most important for the Afghans, it might do something to deter the neighboring countries from interfering in Afghanistan. Remember that in the 1990s, the civil war in Afghanistan was fueled and fed by the neighboring countries backing one side or the other, one warlord or the other. Nobody wants to return to that position. And to have a small contingent of foreign forces there will mean that the U.S. will remain committed to Afghanistan. There will be a greater compulsion for Congress to vote the $4 billion a year that will be needed to sustain the Afghan army, although that cost will be shared with the NATO countries. But a contingent means for the Afghans that there will be a commitment by the Americans which will be visible. And I think, that is going to be important if the new Afghan urban classes, civil society, middle classes who've arisen over the last 12, 13 years are going to stay in the country or are going to flee.
All right. And you were saying there that many Afghans want that continued presence. Participants in that Council of Elders warning of the consequences of a no vote.
If this security pact is not signed, Afghanistan will face the same crisis it faced 12 years ago. There will be a civil war and misery again in the country.
However, elsewhere, like in Jalalabad, which saw anti-US demonstrations 2 days ago, the call is to reject the deal.
If the bilateral security agreement is approved, we'll fully help the Taliban to recognize those participants who approve this agreement. We will provide the list of these criminal jirga participants to the Taliban so that they can be identified and punished.
Ahmed RASHID, is that just boasting, or can they make good on that threat?
Well, no, I mean, it's it's very clear that the Taliban do not want the Americans to stay, and they demanded that the Americans leave. And there is support for the Taliban in many parts of Afghanistan, especially in the east, where these demonstrations took place in Jalalabad, and in the south. And there's no question that the Taliban are insisting that the Americans leave and that they will not compromise on that. Now, what has to be seen is that after the elections, will there be a new president who will be strong enough and effective enough and legitimate enough to give reason for the Taliban to open negotiations with the government and perhaps come to some compromise with the government, which would also mean coming to some compromise with a sustained American presence. Remember, it's also in the Taliban's interest in the long term not to have the foreign neighboring countries intervene in Afghanistan. And at the moment, certainly, as long as you have 40, 50,000 American soldiers there, the Taliban are not going to compromise. But I think next year we will be faced with a new situation, a new dynamic, which could possibly lead to compromises between the government and the Taliban.
All right, you say next year, but while that jirga has been meeting in Kabul, an Afghan government delegation has been to the Pakistani capital, Islamabad. They've been meeting, according to the press, with the former #2 of the Taliban, Mullah Barada, who's seen as a middleman to Mullah Omar, who was chased 12 years ago. With all the talk we've just heard, Fahimeh ROBIOLLE, about how a lot hinges on those elections coming up next spring, can those talks right now be substantive, or it's just really getting acquainted talks?
When I was in Kabul, I could talk about several senators and MPs, and they talked about the different potential candidates, because it was not the list was not stopped, and the name which was coming several times was Mr. Ashraf Ghani, and not, as we hear a lot here, Abdullah, because the people think...
But again, those negotiations with the Taliban, is now the right... Can anything come of those right now? What's the point of having discussions now if we all know that what really matters is what happens after those elections?
There are the negotiations with the Taliban from time to time, and after it stops, and after it starts again. But I think, as we have done in these several years in Afghanistan, all the action was not very well coordinated, and the negotiation with Taliban, I dare that it is possible that we cannot succeed because of the lack of coordination in different parts.
Leela JACINTO, what's at stake here right now?
very interesting that, you know, this is the furthest progress I have seen on this talking to the Taliban front, which has been going on in stops and gaps. But it's interesting that these talks are happening in Pakistan. Mullah Baradai, who is a very senior figure, if no one's confirmed this, but it seems like this meeting took place. Yes, of course. Who is the Taliban? You know, are they going to get all... Or, you know, are they going to get the Haqqani network in? Are they going to get Hekmatyar's Hizbul Islami? You know, maybe we'll get some part of the Quetta Shura, which was, you know, the Taliban leadership. But, you know, those talks should continue. What's happening in Pakistan, if they did in fact meet Mullah Baradai, you know, it shows some progress. But I also want to get back to, you know, the regional players. You know, this bilateral security agreement that is probably going to be passed by the Loya Jirga, because I haven't seen any Loya Jirga go against whoever has set up a Jirga, is being supported by most of the regional countries. Definitely India and China.
You say most.
Well, this is an Afghan official who said most of Afghanistan's neighbors approved it except one. He did not name which country. Could possibly be Iran, who would not like U.S. troops stationed there. Could well be Pakistan, but you know, for the entire regional stability, the arrangement to have some sort of U.S. troops providing support and training is absolutely critical, so that we are looking at a region that has two nuclear-armed neighbors next to each other. Afghanistan has always been played by its neighbor, so this BSA should go through.
Peter Galbraith, you agree?
Yes, I think it is it will provide a measure of stability and security. I think Ahmed RASHID was also right. It is a deterrent to meddling by the neighbors. It does not involve a huge commitment by the United States. For sure, the country that is opposed to it is Iran, but I think that also may be a reflexive kind of statement, because they more or less have to be against it. But it is something I think that will be good for the region, will provide some additional security for Afghanistan, and from an American point of view, not very costly to the United States.
And Peter Galbraith, let me ask you, 12 years on, these exploratory talks, these aren't the first that are taking place with middlemen close to the Taliban or with the Taliban directly. Could they have happened any sooner, in your view?
Well, the essential condition was to have a president and government in Kabul that was seen as legitimate by Afghans and that the Taliban felt they could negotiate with. And Ahmed Karzai was not that, especially after securing his second term by fraud in 2009. Now, I also agree with Ahmed RASHID. If Abdullah wins in a fair election this time, and frankly, he might have won last time if the runoff had actually taken place and if it could have been fair, then maybe he will be in a better position to negotiate with the Taliban, although he actually is considered a Tajik that is not from the Pashtun majority. So, you know, I think a lot will depend on what happens next year. I also think it is significant, very significant, that if this meeting took place with Mullah Baradar, that actually has taken place. A lot of the talks that went on earlier, some of them were with characters who were completely fraudulent, who didn't represent the Taliban at all. I think a shopkeeper from Peshawar got quite a bit of money when people thought that he might be representing the Taliban. So to have Mullah Baradar participate, even though he's been under Pakistani custody for a number of years, is still significant. And you have a sense that with him, you are talking to somebody who is in connection, at least with the Quetta Shura and with Mullah Omar. And I think it is a fair point that there are other elements, the Haqqani network, Hekmatyar, that are capable of causing trouble, that are not part of this process and may not be controllable by, well, the Taliban isn't a single entity.
The Taliban's not a single entity. Final point on this, Leela JACINTO. You heard Peter Galbraith there. How much of this really hinges on the personality of President Hamid Karzai? We've done discussions in the past about his issues with bags of money, for instance, and this sort of thing. But is it really the stigma against this one man that is holding things up to a large degree?
You know, that's very interesting. And I would say yes.
You'd say yes?
Because, yes, I would. Because, you know, the antagonistic relationship right now between Karzai and the Americans has, you know, we filled our column space with it. You know, trying to read the nuances of Hamid Karzai's mind. I've been doing this for a couple of years now. So it would be good to have Karzai out of the way so that we can actually focus on getting this country back on track. It's been 12 years, a very expensive military intervention. You know, we've made great gains in Afghanistan for ordinary Afghan people, and let's not, you know, boil it down to this personality who is in the presidential palace. We are always wondering whether he is, you know, perfectly in control of his senses. How does he make his judgments? We should get beyond that.
All right, we'll leave it there for now. Leela JACINTO, I want to thank Fahimeh ROBIOLLE, Peter Galbraith for joining us from Vermont, and Ahmed RASHID in Lahore. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.